justify that again. And quite frankly, sometimes, especially when he's dealing with the press, I think that soft-spoken voice is his asset, his greatest asset, because how are you going to try to berate somebody who sounds
how are you going to
nice?
attack somebody that talks soft-spoken to you, Well, I'm concerned, and I don't know if you have this concern or not, that we're going to have so many Republicans running that they're going to start attacking one another, and I don't want to see that. I want to see them really rally against what has been going on and not so much focus on one another's weaknesses. And that's something I'm concerned about. I guess I know if they're going to beat each other out in the primary, they've got to do something, but I don't want to see them attacking one another. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, a lot of people have that concern. I don't want to see them start really tearing and ripping each other apart. Let the Democrats do that. I think that if they all just stay on their own message, and again, this is an unusual crew for us this time around. We have 5 people that are in the race right now that are really far right of the mid-level, mid-range, center aisle type of general blue blood Republicans that are currently in the leadership. They're much farther to the right, which is going to be pulling the discussion that way. So even if Bush gets in, we're starting from more of a right position, so there isn't much room for Jeb to pull things back to the left towards him. And we have other true conservatives that haven't even announced yet that might get in, like Scott Walker. I mean, is there anybody else that you would like to see throw their hat in the ring just to keep the conversation going?
Just to keep it going, I'm not sure. I want to see Scott Walker do it, and I appreciate Ted Cruz and let's see, who else have we got? We got Rubio. We've got Rand Paul. What do you think of Rand Paul? A lot of people think he's way out there, but what do you think of him?
I think there are some aspects of him I think that he's way out there. He's like his father on a few things, especially foreign policy. As I tell people, this is not the 1800s. You just can't park an aircraft carrier and say, your Minutemen are all you need for your army, and then all of a sudden have the aircraft carrier fully manned and out to sea in 30 minutes. It's just not going to happen.
Well, I don't think he's that bad. Maybe I'm being naive about it, but I think that unfortunately, they've been correct on some of this. We have had our nose in other people's business, and it's coming back to bite us. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing with ISIS, don't you?
There is some of that, but at the same time, I think that there's also, this current president really hasn't done much to stem the tide of what ISIS is doing and what Iran is doing and what other enemies of the United States have been doing, like Putin, and even to a certain extent China. And this is where a person that needs to have, they don't necessarily need to be an expert in foreign policy, because all you need to do is know human beings. And let's face it, Dr. Carson was a brain surgeon, so if there's any man that knows the brain more than anybody else as far as that group is concerned, it would be him. Again, I'm not endorsing anybody, so people might all of a sudden think I'm endorsing Dr. Carson. I am not. But each one has their strengths, and each one has their weaknesses. But I think looking at the group, Rand Paul may have the greatest number of weaknesses out of the current 5.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you another question. I just kind of lost it here just listening to you. But I was with all of them coming together, and they're a pretty strong group, I think. I don't care for Jeb Bush at all. I think he's one of the rhinos. I'd like to see him pushed out pretty early. But I also know that he's got some big money backing him up. And he had one of the colonels come out in endorsement for him today. I saw that, or was it over the weekend? I don't remember when it was. I saw the article come out. Did you happen to see that?
I did in passing, but I sort of like... because he hasn't announced that he's in yet, and there has been over the past couple of weeks, there was some quiet speculation that he might not actually get in, and mainly because Rubio did already announce to get in. I don't know. It's a game, isn't it? Well, yeah. I know what I was going to say. I was going to tease you about
Barack Obama, but he can't fight ISIS because he's too busy fighting the global warming, because that's the biggest threat to our nation right now. So we have the EPA putting the hammer down on farmers and ranchers and industries across this nation, and just absolutely crippling us. And I know the American people don't all buy into that.
No, poll after poll says, one, that the Americans are believing in it less and less, and two, it doesn't even enter the top 10 of their top concerns anymore. I mean, it's just so down and far on the list, it's ridiculous. But yet this is what the left keeps pulling out of the hat, and they try to keep pounding it away, but nobody's really paying attention because everybody can see that the climate isn't warming up.
Well, did you see the report that came out several months ago where the scientists, in fact, he was one of them that was on board with the other at the beginning, that has jumped ship on them and says, it's cooling down, and we're going to be in trouble if we don't pay attention to what's going on. But he did say that it's not mankind's fault. It is a cycle. And I had a gentleman 2 years ago tell me that that's what's going to happen, that when you saw the Dust Bowl many, many years ago, you and I didn't see it, but when the Dust Bowl happened out in Kansas and the West, he said, we're probably going to see those kind of conditions again, or they will, because it's a cycle, and it's going to come back to where you're not getting the rainfall in some of the areas that you're getting it now. It's not going to be the lush farm land that it has been. Of course, now we've got technology in agriculture, where they can do a little more with the irrigating and that kind of thing. But, that could get pretty scary if our food gets scarce because we're not producing.
Yeah, that definitely would, you could have the 1930s depression type of thing all over again. And it could, when you get a dust bowl or farming droughts, it can also harm the economy because, there are obviously a lot of industry that relies on food and farmers, both commercial and family farms. So if they can't grow and produce, then those companies don't have anything to market. So
and we won't need anybody in the canneries and the factories, and so it's going to be. I've often said, of course, I'm in the rural part of the nation. And I've often said, what happens in rural America happens to all America because people don't see it that way, but it is actually the foundation of this nation. You've got to have an industry that produces food, and, whether it's crops or livestock, it doesn't matter if you're vegetarian or you're a meat eater, you've got to have food. And if we're not producing food for this nation, then we're going to be in big trouble.
Yeah, every civilization, and the civilization and their armies run on two things alone, food and water. Do they have access to food to sustain the civilization, and do they have access to water to also sustain the civilization? So if you're missing one of those two components, you're in big trouble. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, well, I didn't mean to chase you all that far down the direction, that far down the road. But I thought, with what's going on, and I got this email from somebody last week, and he's one of my listeners out of Nebraska, and it wasn't the U.S. Forest Service. It happened to be the National Wildlife Refuge, and they were burning. They were doing what they call controlled burns, only they don't control their burns. And, it'll take livestock, it'll take wildlife, which is what they're supposedly there to protect. And, when you scorch the earth, it takes it a little while to come back. And these big forest fires that, we've had out west, those actually sterilize the ground, and it is worthless after that because of the heat in them. And, they do these things they just don't, they don't monitor what they're doing. And, the Forestry Service, they're not maintaining the forest. There's certain things you have to do to maintain it, or it becomes a tinderbox, and it's just going to go like that. It's like a matchbox. And so, what happens with the industry of agriculture is, it's so important, and I just can't stress that enough. And I kind of wonder, now, what are your listeners saying about their main concern coming up with this 2016 election?
Well, the economy. Because we have so many people still out of work. Even though Obama tells us, we're down at like 5.5% unemployment, which is a lie. But the economy and what's happening in foreign policy in the Middle East, especially. That has a lot of people concerned, and you have the end of the world people out there all of a sudden really ratcheting up their rhetoric too. So it gets under people's skin a little bit. So that's understandable. But they do see that the economy is probably, and it seems like every time we're going to change it, if there's a president that's been in there 2 terms, it seems like we always go back to the point of the economy. So it like the weather is very cyclical, and I think that we've come to that point. Well, we never recovered, so I think it's from the bottoming of the last cycle. So I think that's important. It's going to be very important on everybody's list this time.
I had an article that crossed my desk this morning, and I didn't get to read it in depth, but it was the title of it. It says that the new data says there's 49.7 million are now poor, with 80% of the total population near poverty. That's a lot.
Yeah.
That is astronomical. And they made fun of the presidential race last time when Romney came out and mentioned the 47%. They made fun of that, but here we are with a 49.7 million that are poor, that are considered poor now, and 80% of those total population is nearing poverty. And I know that you're kind of in a city area, but if you drive through the countryside, if you drive, take off and drive from one coast to the other, and you go through what we call the flyover states, and you'll see where the county seats and things are, and how those towns are just collapsing because they have no economy keeping them going. The factories are closing down, and that kind of industry, where you've got through the part of the country that has the coal mines, they're just closing down because of the EPA and the things that are going on. And it's really a big concern. So I was curious what your listeners were saying.
Yeah, people, they understand. Look, they understand 2 things. They understand their stomach and their wallet, and both are getting hit right now, very hard. So that's always going to be when a person's belly's full and their wallet's fat, then other things start to come into play. But people's wallets are very thin, and like you said, the concern with the price of food as it rises also concerns people, especially when they have less and less money to spend. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things that I think that the GOP is going to need to really focus on. Beth, why don't you tell us about how people can listen to you and contact you?
Oh, okay. Well, you can go to my website, which is just simply csctalkradio.com, and there is a station list there. I am nationally syndicated. I'm on about 25 stations across 12 states and shortwave, and then the Internet. And so they can listen to me that way, and you can always listen now or listen later. I've got them all podcasts, so you can go and listen later if you happen to be at work from 10 to 11 in the morning. I am in Central Time, and so my show is 10:06 to 11 a.m. every morning, Monday through Friday. I call it our common sense coffee break time. So we try to make sense out of what's going on, and we have a variety of guests. Today I had John Eidsmoe on. He is with the organization, the Foundation for Moral Law, that was founded by Judge Roy Moore, and we talked about the Supreme Court. Did you read some of those things with the oral arguments that they made last week? I thought it was very interesting and somewhat encouraging. I'm not getting too happy over it just yet, but on the same-sex marriage, on redefining marriage, did you happen to read any of those?
Yeah. There was it looks like that there's, it looks like it's so far it could be a 4-4. So then Kennedy is probably the swing vote at this particular time on the gay marriage issue.
Yes, but they didn't. The arguments that I were reading, they kind of acted like they didn't really want to make this decision.
I don't think they've turned down a lot of that stuff before. Turned it away and sent it back to the states and things like that. I really don't think they wanted to venture into this, but now that they have to, it's going to be quite contentious. And I think Chief Justice Roberts doesn't want to make another serious error like he did with Obamacare.
Boy, they did mess up there, didn't they?
Oh, yeah.
And then, of course, they're talking about, the 40-some years ago when they made the mistake with abortion. They shouldn't be going over and telling all the states what they have to do, and that's what's really, really concerning. There's no longer any state sovereignty. And that's concerning, because how we were set up, and I know we're preaching to the choir here,
Yeah.
but I know how we were set up as a nation is to be governed locally.
Yeah.